Morning, everybody. CanadaPoly.com has private forums. Private means you have to register to see them and register to converse, to join in. But once you do, you get to see all of our conversations. They're very interesting. We'd love to have you join. Link is in the description. So this was released, and this is a Nanos weekly tracking poll. And we're looking, you can break it down by region, so Atlantic Canada or Quebec or Ontario. And the reason I wanted to show you this poll initially was to show you these Ontario numbers, because there's a lot of factors that are going to go into the 2019 election. Maxime Bernier being one, Ontario and Quebec being the other two, right? Like, I've had conversations online and I've posted and said pretty clearly that the election is won in Ontario and Quebec just because of the seat breakdown. And I'll show you the seat breakdown. This is important to understand. So Ontario has 121 seats. Quebec has 78 seats. You have to combine provinces to get close to those numbers for everywhere else in Canada. The Yukon doesn't have much of a say. They can send a representative, but they're not forming government. They're not even a bellwether, right? Atlantic Canada as a whole has 34 seats, I think. That's just off... or 35 maybe. It's very close to Alberta when you add them all up. And all together as a block, they make up a voting block, and the Liberals are taking full advantage of that. But again, it's a bellwether taken together, but everybody has to know that they're different islands, right? And not all are voting together for the same thing, right? Like, it's not like people in Ontario or even people in Quebec have a common thing to vote for, right? Like, New Brunswick and PEI have different education systems, right? Like, and they're administered differently, right? So there's split there. There's cost duplication there. There's all sorts of stuff. But my point is they're not voting as a block together, right? It's not like get those Liberals out because the education system's bad and the Conservatives are going to fix it, right? Because PEI is different than New Brunswick, right? So that's my point. And provincial runs education, so that's possibly a bad example, but it illustrates my point sufficiently enough. Okay, so the election is always won in Ontario and Quebec, and Alberta is a big province, BC is a big province, and together, they're a Quebec, right? And it's hard to predict an election in Ontario and across Canada, because we've been talking about how hyper-local the elections are. So I wanted to show you this because of Ontario. So look at these numbers. This is a Liberal high on November 16th of 48.14. I think that's the highest. 48.47 maybe. Yeah, whatever. Doesn't really matter. 48.14. And Conservatives 31.22. And the NDP relatively weak at 12.20, right? So 12% to Liberals 48%. And from November 16th to December 7th, the Liberals fall off a cliff and they lose almost 10 points, more than 10 points. And the CPC surged to 46. So they are decimating the Liberals at this point in time if an election were called. And we're seeing a strong NDP here, 15%. That's a strong NDP. And the Liberals at 36 with the Conservative Party at 42% here. And Bernier, PPC, is in green territory, which is news in and of itself, right? Like 2.89% on Nanos is not insignificant. They were 1% earlier. So, but that's a massive, massive surge for the Conservatives in a very short period of time, and a massive drop for the Liberals. So something's changed in Ontario. The feeling has the hair in the socks have worn off a little bit. And I wanted to show you this, and I don't know how this is possible. But here's Quebec, right? So this is the Quebec Nanos polling, and it's got PPC in there as well, and they're 1.67. The Liberals are consistently, absolutely destroying everybody else. So now here's to the point of my video. This is Quebec. Right? This is the week-to-week polls. This is Quebec. This isn't a wide-open vote. This isn't wide open for somebody to come and get in here and to drive a wedge and bring the Liberals down, because there's wedge issues to be had in Quebec. Don't tell me there aren't. And this Liberal government is I cannot believe it's as strong as this poll looks. But if they're that strong, and if the Conservative Party is this weak, and we're looking at like NDP level in Ontario level numbers here, 15%, right? And that's December 14th for the CPC in Quebec, according to Nanos. So that's a pretty incredible drop. Bernier is already at almost 2% in Quebec, and the Greens are at almost 9%, according to Nanos. So, like I said, you don't see that as wide open for a giant wedge issue to be put right in there? And does that wedge issue that could be put in by the Conservatives or put in by the People's Party, does that wedge affect the whole country in a meaningful way? Well, yeah, because there's 78 seats at stake. If you believe that Nanos poll, and I mean, the Liberals were very, very, very popular going into 2015, just because of the anybody but Harper vote, right? Especially in Eastern Canada, because they knew they could safely ignore the West, and it doesn't matter once you hit Ontario, right? Look, 200 seats right there, right? Easy. So you win the election there and you ignore these people. And that's unfortunately how Justin Trudeau is doing politics, right? It's not fair to the West, and it panders to Ontario and Quebec. And you see that reflected in the numbers. But like I said, in Ontario, things are changing. And I think, and changing quite a lot, like that's a scary trend going into an election year. And I think that there's a whole lot of room for a big Liberal fall in Quebec when you get a strong leader who's talking about things that people in Quebec want to hear about. And Bernier may not be that person because he's talking about ending transfer payments. But again, he's talking about ending transfer payments in a way that encourages making your own province richer by developing its own natural resources. And we have a lot of natural resources. And why not develop the natural resources you have? Because that creates jobs, that creates wealth, that creates prosperity for everybody, right? And if you can become a wealthy business person in Quebec by brokering our natural resources, which is exactly what people do in Alberta, right? You become an oil company in Alberta because that's where the oil is, right? And oil-friendly laws and oil-friendly, used to be pipelines, etc., to facilitate the sale of Canada's goods. It benefits everybody. The richer each province gets, the richer Canada gets, right? And the transfer payments, a case can be made to stop them, right? If it's made properly. And I think Bernier can do that, but with the media the way they are, it's going to be a tough sell. But what I'm saying is there's a wedge issue that can drive those Liberals right down and catapult another party up. There's a huge amount of space for that. I mean, look at the NDP. You know, they were able to sell their message pretty clearly and with a high watermark of 47% support, right? And this is when they were in the official opposition. This is in 2015, or up until Mr. Mulcair imploded and dropped, because they were the opposition in 2015 going into the 2015 election. So they were seen as either going to form government or at least stay opposition. Nobody expected the Conservatives to maintain the opposition, but the NDP just kind of fell off a cliff. And in where it mattered, and where it mattered was Quebec, right? So it's very, very interesting. Here's the Washington Post. So, okay, I'm going to finish off on this. I think there's room for the PPC and the Conservative Party, and I think that the way there's room for that is, in Ontario and Quebec, right? And if all of the Conservative seats in the West, in Alberta and Saskatchewan and Manitoba, maintain Conservatives, that's a strong result, right? And Andrew Scheer has a machine that's running, a fundraising machine, everything that you need to be a competitive party already set up. So yeah, he's got the edge. He's got the edge going in here. But I think, like I said, there's so many seats here, and a lot of people have their mind made up that they won't vote Conservative for whatever reason. So, man, with 10 months to go, there is so much room. And with Liberals misstepping every single day with scandals, with ethics violations, with having a finance minister that was named in the Panama Papers, and he's married to the heiress of the McCain Foods. Look it up, really. It's crazy. Like these people who are telling us that we need to open up our borders for everybody are elite, rich people who have never, ever had to have a job in their life, right? Have never had to do anything that they didn't want to do. Oh, it just makes me sick. Okay, so I think there's lots of room for PPC. I think there's a huge amount of room for a wedge here in Quebec. And don't fool yourself. Ontario and Quebec win elections. Justin Trudeau, moving on now. Justin Trudeau's terrible new election rules will limit citizen activism. This is by the Washington Post, and I don't usually like the Washington Post, but I'm always interested in foreign media reporting on our terrible, terrible prime minister. So they're reporting on our terrible prime minister. So Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government recently passed more than 200 pages of dramatic changes to the way Canadian elections work. Among other things, the new rules will further restrain the degree that Canadians can exercise their constitutional rights to free political speech and activism. Such regulations were passed with the standard progressive smugness that heavily regulated political speech and activity in the name of fairness and equality is unambiguously virtuous. Righteous self-confidence, however, does not negate the practical consequences of this fundamentally illiberal exercise of state power. Trudeau's final bill represents no improvement from the draconian first draft introduced in April. According to the Democratic Institutions Ministry, the new legislation seeks to ensure that political actors operate on a fair and level playing field and will impose reasonable limits on their budgets. Translated to English, this means the government has devised new ways to punish politically motivated groups of Canadians, be they environmentalists, social conservatives, business or labor leaders, minority rights activists, or anything in between, who engage in activities such as advertising or canvassing door to door, making telephone calls to electors, that's citizens, and organizing rallies without first conforming to Ottawa's rules. Canada's formal election period is now capped at 50 days before the election day, with 2 months or so before comprising a novel pre-election period as well. During pre-election time, a concept that has no democratic rationale beyond government's expansive appetite to control political activity, so-called third parties are treated with as much suspicion as during the tightly regulated elections themselves. Groups and individuals may not spend more than $700,000 on, quote, partisan activities and partisan advertising during this period and must immediately register with the government after spending their first $500. Ottawa expects a full itemized list of revenue and expenses incurred, including the date and place of every attempt to change a mind. I'll note here, I'm not trying to change anybody's mind. I hope you do your own research and make up your own mind. My mind is made up, and this whole show is me telling you what my mind is. But you, dear viewer, have a responsibility to yourself to make up your own mind. Back to the article. Thanks to those amendments and others, the Canadian Elections Act is now impossibly long and frighteningly intimidating. Any Canadian who plans to exert any significant expense or effort in persuading his or her fellow citizens to vote one way or another in next year's election should immediately retrain a team of lawyers and accountants, as there is simply no other way to navigate the dense brush of legal weeds that now govern election-adjacent democratic participation in Canada. Rule breakers can expect thousands of dollars in fines or even prison time. Things will almost certainly get worse. The paradoxical dream of perfectly controlled democracy that inspired Trudeau's Election Modernization Act and the many terrible prior election laws it builds upon is fundamentally authoritarian project forever finding fresh justification to further constrain citizens' rights. Wow. I scroll down. The other beneficiary of all this is the media. Canadian election laws a law does not consider journalists as third parties, even though they're employees of large corporations who spend a great deal of money influencing what voters think about politics. Perhaps this is because Ottawa has a different plan for them. The Trudeau government recently unveiled $595 million in fresh funding to subsidize Canadian news outlets and a corresponding government committee to identify instances of journalism worthy of subsidization. Oh, let's look for those journalists who are fully indoctrinated and doing the right speak, right, everybody? Back to the article. These are the trend lines of Canadian democracy at present: a consolidation of influence for those who already have it, while ever higher bureaucratic barriers are erected to curb the impact of everyone else. Healthy self-governance cannot be sustained with regressive priorities such as these. Okay, so that is a harsh critique of Trudeau's new election laws, and I've said before, when the government passes bad laws, we're bound by those bad laws. So we have to listen to those bad laws. And unfortunately, they're in charge of the government until we make a difference or we make a change. And as I said, there's change to be had, but we have to convince the right people, and the right people are citizens of specific provinces. So I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what happens, but it's an interesting ride to watch. Thank you for watching. Check out the peoplespartyofcanada.ca and Maxime Bernier. You may want to vote for him in the 2019 election. Maybe not. Who knows? Thanks for watching. Have a wonderful day.